And we are live.
It's Tuesday.
It is Tuesday. I don't know about you, but I'm
Dirk has to
excited.
pee.
That's
So do
that's
I,
on the
so
stream now. No pun intended.
That's what we mean by streaming, right?
Yeah.
Well, if that's what streaming is, then you can call me Miles Davis. I don't know if that doesn't really that doesn't translate the way that I wanted it to, but
What?
I was like trying to
I got-
dovetail in a Happy Gilmore or was it Happy Gilmore? No, it was a Billy Madison quote. So
Yeah,
just ignore it.
right.
It's whatever. It's fine. It's fine.
No, John, explain it for us.
Nope.
If you could.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Cool. That's good. You should watch the movie Billy Madison.
Nope.
That's fine too. You don't have to watch
Won't
it.
won't do it.
It's not as bad as Halloween Kills, I promise.
Do you guys watch movies?
We do. I do. When no one's looking.
Three every year on the same weekend. That's how I roll.
Yeah.
I watched a movie this week.
What'd you
You
watch?
did?
Watch.
I watched Dune with Zach, and I slept
That's
through
right.
the first 13
That wasn't
minutes.
this week, but sure, yeah.
It was pretty much this week. It feels like this week.
Yeah, I'm still bummed. Troy sent a TikTok of some scene that was filmed for Dune where Gurney was plucking at an instrument. And I was like, oh, man.
A Bastillette or something like that?
Sure. Some guitar-like instrument.
I'll correct you, but I'm not going to this time.
Correct who?
I think it's a.
Hurdy-gurdy.
That'd be cool.
There was somebody playing one at Game Hole. God, I was like, Jesus, that's neat.
I like hurdy-gurdies. Yeah, Balisette. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Thank you, Villanos. Yeah. My guess is it'll be in the 5-hour director's cut that comes out.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, we can only be so lucky. Yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't complain about it.
You
at
wouldn't?
all. No.
That's cool.
No, I would not either. I would thank someone. I would drive to wherever they are and.
I
shake
could at
their
least
hand.
understand what was going on if someone was playing an instrument.
What, would you complain about a 5-hour extended cut, John?
Yeah. I think it was just fine
Yeah.
where it was. It wasn't.
It's going to be a 5-hour.
I didn't need any more than that.
It's gonna be a 5-hour movie anyway, right?
It didn't need to be. It didn't need to be given the Peter Jackson treatment on that. Or
Oh,
in,
no,
in,
it
in
didn't,
regards to like
but
a
it
Hobbit, the Hobbit, right? Version
It
of.
will.
Basically the same kind of feel, though. Like, the people that like Dune regard it like The Hobbit, right?
Well,
Like that kind
not
of
like
writing?
The Hobbit, like Lord of the Rings, less like The Hobbit. Yeah, in the sense that it has a grander scale and is more literary by design and reception than The Hobbit. But believe it or not, the movie talk was last week.
We still have
Was-
feelings about it. Strong feelings about those three movies.
Tonight we're not. We're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, I guess, a TV show instead. 'Cause that's the way we roll. Yeah, I think this one will have more to do with D&D though. So,
Maybe.
I mean,
We'll see.
it
We'll
would
see how,
all
we'll see how
have
long
to.
that lasts.
Speaking of which, shall we go ahead and get this recorded, Troy?
Record the recording.
That's right.
We should.
Girk, Velanaz, Killot. Good to see you.
Dark
Joint-
Urban
joint-
Games.
yeah, Dark
Who's
Urban
Dark
Games.
Urban Games.
Joint effort. Roxasy. Felonaz. Another TT
Roxasy.
viewers out there.
Roxasy kind of almost sounds like a late 80s, early 90s
Mhm.
music group.
Fair
Or
enough.
like the lost member of Jim and the Holograms. Maybe.
Roxasy.
Do that.
We are recording then, Troy.
We are recording.
All right. Well, then let's get this show on the road. In 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to the Bite Size Gaming Podcast, the podcast that's serving up a buffet of RPG topics to get you through your week. My name is Zach, and the hosts joining me this evening are Thomas Votaw, Troy Sandlin, and John Christian.
Lolly ho. That's it.
Howdy,
I like it.
And then
I like it.
silence
Yeah,
from
yeah.
everyone else.
Success.
Hello.
Yes.
I just, okay.
It's all
What
whistles
are
and
we?
clicks.
Are we on? Are we on? What?
It's been.
I didn't
can
get.
you
I
tell
didn't
we
get my
had an off
countdown
day?
timer.
This is what happens anytime you take a day off, and we
Right.
took our Sunday off. You come back, and it takes a little while to get into whatever groove we had before.
We had a groove.
What's going to happen when we go back to Ascension? It's just going to be an hour of us just staring at each other with no words.
Yeah, the you know the intro is pretty rough for the first 2
That's right.
years
Or so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Like yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it
Conan.
kind of threw me off. It threw me off because we're actually starting the actual podcast 5 minutes into the actual going
It's
live,
amazing.
so it's kind of like,
Yeah, it's amazing.
oh my goodness, we're actually doing the thing.
Yeah, I was listening to a Conan podcast this week, and they were talking about how it took them their whole first season to figure out really what even a podcast was supposed to do. And then I'm like, yeah, I someday we'll get there. Like that's the dream, right?
That's the goal. We'll work on
Someday.
making it good. Let's just figure out what it is first.
Zach, I would like to know what that podcast is later on because I'll add it to my massive.
I'll tell you. I listened to Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend.
Oh,
That's the name of the podcast.
I thought you
Yeah.
meant like a
Conan the Destroyer.
Robert E. Howard.
No.
Oh my
no,
God! There's
no.
a Conan podcast.
Yeah, I was like,
Sign me up.
No,
I
the
don't
talk
need-
show host.
I don't need
Mr.
anything
O'Brien.
to add to my podcast list.
No. It's not
There's-
about need.
Right.
Yeah,
You
but
might have to remove something.
Mhm.
I'm going to have to
to-
remove a
to-
lot of things. Like, at this point, I already fall behind at every single turn.
Can Girk not hear us? Girk says silence.
No, he was commenting on the silence that played out there for a few beats.
Oh, is the
The,
sound
the
sound of
uncomfortable
silence?
silence after John dorked out Lolly Ho as usual, which is
I
like
believe that's true. Yeah.
cricket
It's
chirping.
like the time that I just pretended that I wasn't wearing a Where's Waldo costume on our stream, and then it's just like that. I'll just pretend like I'm mute.
That's right.
Makes for a great podcast.
It does. So, Kill-A-Lot is bringing up a good point, which will kind of get us started in this episode. We had some ideas about streaming a commentary track, kind of MST3K style, of the first Critical Role episode. And we thought better of that for a couple of reasons, and I think we made the right choice. I don't think that it was prime content that you missed out on.
Mhm.
No.
Whatever your feelings of Critical Role are, what we did watching Critical Role was even worse content by a country mile, because it was basically like 20 minutes of sitting, listening, and then like every 15-20 minutes be like, okay, pause, let's talk about that for 5
Yep.
minutes. All right, let's
Yep.
keep going. So you didn't miss
You missed nothing.
you missed nothing, and we saved most of it for tonight actually, because we thought it'd be better to just like collect thoughts and deposit them into an episode and kind of process maybe why we think some of the things that we thought, some questions that we had, and we thought that we'd bring along Thomas for this ride, so that we have like the whole array of Critical Role fandom. We have like, go ahead, Tom.
I would like to, before we get officially started,
Yes.
I would like to ask people before they started season 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 how they felt about Critical Role, and then after their opinion at the end.
Oh, I love that. I love
yeah.
that. Let's do this real
So
quick before we
it
dive
doesn't.
in.
I just don't want to get started on the topic before we.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
thought
yeah,
that
yeah.
was a great way to sort of
that's a great idea. Um, so let's start with this though. Before we dive in, is there any news that any of you feel like we need to cover real quick in the world of gaming? Not crowdfunders, but other stuff in general.
There is a new D&D survey out,
There you go.
and
Highly ho.
it takes you about 25 minutes to do.
That's not surprising.
And it's very in depth, and it talks about your history with D&D. It also asks about your favorite settings
Mm-hmm.
of D&D. Goes into detail about those things like that. So if you're really itching for, you know, Mystara to come back, or the known or Hollow World or something like that, now's your chance to get on that survey and talk about it, or forever let your voices be silenced, kind of thing. I had to retake it because somehow, as I'm buzzing through on my phone, I don't know what I hit, but I shut the window out. You can stop it and come back to it if you do the save to restart later. But my dwarf fingers hit something on the screen and closed the whole thing out. So
Isn't that great? It's like sausage links.
Awesome.
yeah,
Yep.
it's like ding. And I was about like 15 minutes in.
The best part is you're going to try to start it up again, and they're going to be like, "We've already gotten your your feedback. We know that you hate everything about D&D," and you're just like, "No, that's not what I wanted to say."
Welcome, Master Dungeons and Craig. Yes.
Thanks, Craig. It is a sad state of affairs indeed. A stream talking about a stream.
Now, Mitch, you mentioned Dark Sun, and I'll comment that there was a pang of like sadness that rippled through me. I think Dark Sun had its 30th anniversary this year. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just kind of passed through the news last week, and you know, I was like, you know, I kind of wonder if we weren't at one point intended to have Dark Sun this year, and it got pushed back.
Mm-hmm.
It's not coming.
And it went with a whimper. It definitely feels like
Yeah.
it. That anniversary.
Yeah.
It's. Do you guys really think it's going to happen?
I don't think it will, personally.
No.
If they do it, I think it'll be.
I don't know.
I don't think it's going to be as detailed as people probably want it. It may not be in a book. It may be like a multiverse book, where they have like smatterings of stuff, like multiple settings in one book. That'll do kind of like a quick recap. Like, here's when last we met in Athas, kind of thing.
They're poking it with a stick and telling it to stay away.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of see
my
that.
guess.
I would not be surprised at this point that they do that with Dragonlance, with Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. Like, here's a little bit.
They're not.
That's good enough. And then the 3 books that are going to come
Not
out.
what's going to happen.
You think they're actually going to do a full setting?
100%.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Since we're talking about Dragonlance, I have a little something. I was working on costumes this weekend. I posted in chat the Halloween costume that I wore for part of this weekend. If you guys see that, I love the literature so much that I had to be a dragon rider.
Excellent. All right. You're riding
say
Sky.
it.
That's fantastic.
I'm sorry. If you guys thought I was still talking, I was just my segue. I'm not actually Dragonlance. I like Aragon a lot, so I picked.
Oh, okay.
That's
cool.
cool. I like that.
The Superior Dragon series.
Yeah.
Well, the other piece of news that I had, and it's not really news; it's more of a commentary, is I think I read or saw 5 articles this week that blatantly, and there's an element that is always going to be clickbait, but there's also an element that I think we just adopt into our vernacular. And I saw 5 articles that either said blah 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 5.5e or blah 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 6th edition. And it wasn't talking about there's a 6th edition announced. It's like, oh, this component was talked about that may relate to 6th edition. Or here's the thing that was, that we're looking forward to in 5.5, and it was, this is part of our everyday language now, is that we are gearing up for a 5.5 or a 6E.
Well, it's
And
triggering for a lot of people. I think it's more clickbait than anything else.
well, that's what I was saying, is like there is a clickbait, and there was a lot of that a few weeks ago, but I think now, like, I think it's almost gotten like, my read is that it's got past the point of clickbait, and it's settled into just like a chunk of the population has just accepted that we're not going to pretend that it's anything that it's not. It's going to be another edition in some element. So we're not going to call it 5E plus. We're going to call it 5.5, or we're going to call it 6. And we're waiting to determine which one we settle on until we see what it looks like.
Mm.
But anyhow, it's just really interesting that that language has persisted and probably will persist and probably will grow stronger over the next 2 years. And at that point, why not, right? If everybody's already saying it's 5.5, even if you release a 5E plus,
Still 5.5.
it's still 5.5.
It's gonna be D&D more next.
More next year.
More next.
Nexter.
Next. Yeah.
The nextiest.
Anything else we need to talk about in the news? Getting a lot of head shakes.
Mitch says that the new service rewards doc came out for AL, which hasn't. I haven't seen that yet, but.
Ooh, that's interesting. All right. Well, I'm sure you can find that on the Adventurers League website, which I believe is
D&D Next
adventuresleague.org.
Evolution Extreme.
That's right. Well, hey, then let's dive in
dive
to our
in.
main topic today. We got plenty of time to discuss it. Today, we're going to talk about Critical Role Episode 1. And look, we're not. This is a once in a lifetime experience. This is not going to be a regular segment or a regular episode in our feed.
Yeah, I wouldn't even call it an experience. It's just a thing that's happening.
Yeah. But we did all sit down and watch a chunk of it. Thomas watched the whole thing. Troy or John, did either of you end up finishing it out?
Yep.
I made it about a little over halfway through. A little
Okay.
over. Past the combat and a little bit further than that. Yeah.
Okay.
I've watched it actually. I've watched it once and listened to it once. So because I had it,
all right.
I had headphones in when I was at work today.
Mm.
Mostly
right.
just because I was doing this show. If I wasn't doing the show tonight, I wouldn't have.
I
I
love
wouldn't
that.
have re-listened.
I love that Thomas is a wonderful guest and does better homework than we do, and we're the ones that are supposed to be hosting this thing.
Well, that's the whole point of getting guests in, right?
Oh, you do the heavy lift for us? Cool. Let's do that more often.
That's how that should work, right? Like, when
Isn't
we
that
had
how? Yeah.
That's
guy
part
from
of figuring
D&D
out
Beyond.
podcasts. Yeah.
Oh, damn. Oh, that's the thing. Cool. Excellent. Well, that took us 2 years.
It's like, being
Somebody
good in
write that down,
business.
yeah.
It's like being good in business. It doesn't matter if you're, if you're smart enough to run the business, you just have to surround yourself with people smarter than you to do the stuff for you.
Oh, see, that's I've heard that one before.
Yeah, so that's why we got Thomas come on.
Yes. We've got Mr. David and Mr. Joe in chat now as well. It is a full chat tonight, which
is.
we love. Okay, we're going to do the thing that Thomas asked for, which I think is a great idea. We're going to talk about where we were in relation to Critical Role pre-walking into it. This will help you get a context, because if one of us says we absolutely adore it and we walked in cold, that's a big indicator, right? And if somebody says they hated it and they've watched every episode of every season so far, that's also a big indicator. So, Thomas, since it was your suggestion, let's start with you.
I would say that I now, to get just a hair backstory, I have consumed all of both seasons and all of the one shots, and I've watched some of their other stuff as well, but I have watched all of both seasons, and I've listened to, as background noise when I was painting and stuff like that, season 1 about another 50% of the way through. So I'm not a diehard. It's not the reason I play D&D, but I am probably an 8.5 or a 9 out of 10. EXU
Okay.
actually, Exandria United is David's asking, is the only thing I did not consume so far because the summer's been so crazy.
which is kind of their thing that's set in the same universe, but was like a mini campaign ran by a different DM. Yeah.
Right.
Which ties in very directly into the story, though.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
very much
seems
so.
like a lead
Very
in.
much so.
Yeah.
Troy, in clockwise on my screen. Let's talk to you next.
Okay, I have consumed all of season 1, or all of campaign 1, all of campaign 2, mostly in podcast form, but
Same.
watching some episodes. I have also watched or listened to the Deadwood mini series thing. I watched some of EXU. I think I've watched some of the one shots. I also watched the Gray Hands or whatever, or
Yes.
Force Gray.
Force Gray,
that,
yeah.
That Matt Mercer did. Things like that. So, yeah, I haven't watched all the one shots yet. I haven't finished EXU. I don't know where on a scale of 1 to 10 I'd put myself on a fan. I consider it the same way I'm a fan of Star Wars. There are parts of Star Wars that I just absolutely love, but I can sit and bitch about it all day long.
Mm-hmm. What is your out of 10 on the fandom scale? Where would you rank yourself?
I'd say probably about a 6.5, 7.
6.5, 7. All right, great. So
for me, I would miss Critical Role if it was gone, but it wouldn't stop me from anything I do on a regular basis. It
Right.
wouldn't stop me from playing D&D or changing how I play or any of the above.
I definitely look forward to it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that I do with my wife is a non-D&D, has never played D&D or a role-playing game in her life. She's watched every episode of season 2.
Cool. All right. John, you're next.
I have not, before this, I'd never seen a complete episode ever of Critical Role. I'd seen bits and pieces. I think I'd seen a couple of clips here and there. The most that I'd probably seen in total was maybe 30 minutes of media consumed here and there. Despite the a reputation I may have of not liking Critical Role, I'm like, if I had to be honest about it, I'm really more indifferent than anything else, and I didn't get it. Was my big thing, because the closest thing that I've come to watching or listening to anyone play D&D for 3 to 4 hours was the PAX events with Acquisitions Incorporated, and that was, to me, was a little bit different. That it was the personalities were the funniest, were the best part about it. It was just really funny, and it was meant to be silly kind of thing, and not that
It's a comedy show.
Yeah, it's a comedy show, and so I took it as
and
such.
there's crowd participation too.
Yeah, and I'd even watched like Harmon Quest with some of Dan Harmon's stuff there, which was pretty cool. I just, for whatever reason, I just couldn't sit down and try Critical Role. It just didn't do it for me. And maybe it was like I don't know. I'm not really entirely sure why I resisted for so long, because I did straight up. I resisted it. I just wasn't interested at all until I got to the point where I was like, I think we've said it before. I wanted to figure out what it was I was missing out on. If there was something that I was missing out, because for all I know, this could be like the best thing since Cheese Whiz, and the last thing I want to do is turn my nose up to it and be out of the loop with the community and the things that they love. So I figured I'd give it a try.
There you go. Cool. I would say that on my end, I approached like the D&D stream pretty early with a lot of I remember listening to Ack Inc. podcasts back when they were doing 4E, right?
Yep.
And they were on Dark Sun, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I loved and devoured Ack Inc. for a long time, and that was my show for a long time, and that's why I didn't approach Critical Role early on. But at this point, I've seen the Force Gray bits. I've seen about 160, or listened to about 160 episodes of season 2. A couple episodes from season 1. Bounced off season 1 pretty hard. a few of their one shots and Deadwood, and so I would say, John, we didn't give you an opportunity to do a grade. I would put myself at like maybe like a 4.5, 5, somewhere in there.
I'm like a beforehand. The only reason why I'm this low is not because of any animosity, but rather just again indifference. I'm like a 2 or a 3. Like it's just
Yeah.
something that's on the periphery that people are talking about. I don't know. I just don't. I couldn't devote 4 hours watching people play D&D when I would just as soon either play it or run it. Right. It's the same reason why like I was in football and sports in high school and in middle school, but I couldn't care less about watching any sport now. It's just like watching paint dry for me because I would rather be involved in it in some capacity
Right.
instead.
That's crazy because every week I sit at the Browns game and I hate myself for it, and I go home and I've ruined my entire day. And I played football for 12 years.
And everybody,
And
yeah, and that I've got other buddies of mine that are like that, where they just like they watch the crap out of sports. They're really into it. I'm just like, I really enjoyed it while I did it. I just can't watch somebody else do it. It's just boring to me.
Well, I mean that kind of harkens back to Thomas's sadomasochistic tendencies to himself.
It's self
fair enough. At this point, we were supposed to be good, and I'm still going, and we're bad. So I can't disagree.
I said, so as a point of clarity, Bear Droid is asking how many episodes. I think I said 160. I think I overshot that by a bit. The first campaign is 115 episodes. The second campaign is 141, and I made it to episode 118. And then there are 39 one-shots and 8 episodes on Exandria Unlimited, and then 2 episodes of the current season.
Holy
So
moly.
you're probably talking 250, 300 episodes, probably averaging somewhere around
About 4 hours.
4 hours.
Yeah.
So you're talking 1,200 hours of content. Yep. Yeah. That's that.
Something to fill your rainy day.
I agree with you though, John. As somebody who can look at it objectively, I can't sit. I am too busy. I would never ever have any feeling of wanting to watch Critical Role if I had to sit in front of a TV
Yeah,
every
nope.
episode for 4 hours. I've worked 2 jobs or 3 jobs since I started watching Critical Role that have been lock yourself in a room or lock yourself. I'd start, or like when I was painting, I was headphones in for 12 hours a day. And I can't run or play D&D during those times. So I put on something that I enjoy, whether it's this podcast or a book on tape or Critical Role or anything else. And that is how I really enjoyed them, because I could 500 hours doesn't feel like that many hours when you're working 50, 60 hours a week and you have nothing else to do, and you might as well listen to something or because I'm not going to watch it on TV.
And I
And there
totally
was-
get that. And I think Troy had mentioned before that he listened more than he ever viewed.
Oh yeah.
And I could totally get that. I think for me though, again, I'll listen to audiobooks. And so that's one of the other things too. I've already have some kind of media that I consume, an audio form of media that I listen to on a regular basis, that I was like, it was the precedent, right? So I'm not going to replace something that I'm not really sure about, or that I'm not really thinking. I don't think I'm really going to get into it at all with all of the stuff that I've been consumed through audiobooks. So, because I'm like David, I used to drive a lot, back and forth, about
Same.
3 hours total per day, an hour and a half one way and an hour and a half back from work through traffic, and so I listened to a lot of books that way, and it just Critical Role just never got spun into the
Exactly
the
the
list.
same. You guys were talking about a Conan podcast before we got real started, and Troy thought it was a Conan the Barbarian podcast, and I said, well, that would be cool, but I would have to cut something else because I don't have the time.
Well,
and that's the same thing you said with I just cut for Critical Role, or I listened to a couple and I cut for Critical Role, and it was worth it to me to change some other stuff out to make the time.
You wouldn't have to really cut anything, Thomas. You just would have to make the choice to not listen to Critical Role again.
There's that. But I was to be fair, I was driving. When I was driving to Cleveland, I was driving on a good day. If I left at normal times, I was in the car for 5 hours.
Yeah.
So it's easy when you're listening to 7 episodes a week, just in your car.
Fair enough. Okay, so we all kind of have our basis now. So the second or the third campaign launched in October, and we had intentions of watching it live and all that, but we settled on what we settled on, and so now we all have this experience, and we I think it would be disingenuous of us to say like here's how we grade an episode of a show, right? Like that's a bit of a mess, especially for people who haven't followed it all. So I don't know that we're here to grade it, but I think maybe draw what we can out of it and say like here's interesting things that we picked up on. John, I know you had a kind of a list of things that uh, at least a short list that you were bringing up during the episode about the contract that Mercer has between himself and his players, and how that's presented. I think those are the things that I think we should focus on tonight. Is like, what are those things that we draw from an episode of Critical Role that is either very, very different. I think Mitch there in chat was talking about how Critical Role plays a different type of D&D than we do. Why are those things different? And is that even true? Is you can talk about that, but what are those differences, and what are the similarities, and how can we make our games better, or at least play around with things based off that?
To what Mitch is saying, to what you're saying right now, I think that's part of the issue that exists within Critical Role, because you can't. It's not just a thing. It is a unique. It's its own thing, because it is a show on the one hand, and it is a group of people playing D&D on the other. Yeah. It is a show that uses the rules of D&D as a framework to present the information of the show and to present the action and stuff like that. So, the arguments of, well, it's not real D&D. Yes and no. It's D&D, but it's D&D being played in a way that normal people don't play it. Normal people don't have an audience of thousands of people watching their every move. And their DMs don't have a budget or a production crew or anything like that behind them. So it is a show. It is a vehicle of entertainment that people watch and not experience. So yeah, they're going to play it a little bit differently than what we play.
Yeah, I kind of liken it to, based on what I watched, it feels like, and I don't mean this in any derogatory sense whatsoever, by the way, that it's like reality television, where it's not, it's close-ish, or it is like a representation of reality, but it's not necessarily reality, right? That there may not be a script that they're following, but there's kind of like there's still a path that they're kind of on together, or that they have agreed to play it a certain way, or to run it a certain way whenever they interact with one another at the table, whenever Matt's talking and things like that. And again, it's not bad. To your point, Troy, it is still D&D, but it's just not. It's not a version of D&D that I've ever played, or that I've ever run. And by that I mean like the way that things kind of operate in the whole grand scheme of the show, from what I gather.
I do think though that this last viewing for me, interestingly enough, you would think after 100 episodes I would have actually thought about anything, but evidently not until this one. But I think I came away saying there's nothing here that's not impossible to emulate at your table.
Right.
Yes, they have this contract between Matt and his players, where Matt's fine with taking a back seat and with giving them opportunities to step in. And I think a lot of DMs do that. But the players also have this agreement of when it's our opportunity to do so, we are going to take that opportunity as it's presented. We're going to work our way through something within these parameters of our capacity to do so. And we are going to find an exit ramp to then hand it back off to Matt, the DM, right? Like that there was this exchange that came before them, right? Matt sets the scene, the players chew the scene. Matt resets the scene, the players chew another scene, right?
And if they don't bite, Matt moves on.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is 100% what you're saying, John. This agreement behind the scenes of that's how it's going to go, and it's in part because it's an audience. There's an audience watching, and it needs to be entertaining to that audience and give them the content that they're after. But I would also wonder if there isn't an element of, would they do that even if their game wasn't being recorded? And I think the argument maybe for them is yes, right? And I think it's not an unfair way to play D&D. It's not an unreasonable. I mean, I don't have a one-to-one comparison, but with my Middle Earth game, and now with Dune, you know, two very epic feeling franchises, right? We leave more space for narrative and, you know, player speeches and back and forth and just you know, intrigue and things like that in general, and less room for rolling dice and combat and all the things that one typically attributes to, you know, RPGs. So, and that's a contract. It wasn't a perfectly spelled out thing, but it's one thing where we started and we said, you know, as it rolled out and as we did our session 0 and as we did our first few sessions, we found that rhythm that worked for our table, and it was way closer to Critical Role than maybe some of my tables have been before.
The other thing is that at least what I see is that, and I was just talking with Master of Dungeons here, that I don't seem to have that sort of that CR, the Critical Role film put over by my players, like a lot of DMs and players have complained about. But I also feel like I make it very obvious that there's a different game being played. It's the same D&D. You are, but I see a difference, even like Zach's saying in his Dune game and everything else. I see a difference from my convention players than I see to the people at the table, and I think that is because when you start playing with people for a long time, and Critical Role hasn't played as long as most of the people on Critical Role hasn't played D&D as long as anyone in this conversation right now.
Right.
I think all of us probably started playing before a lot of these guys got together for that very first home game and everything else. I know a lot of those, Taliesin and Matt and Marisha and them had played from 4th edition and some other stuff, but a lot of the other guys, especially Travis and Laura and Ashley and things like that, weren't D&D players 8 years ago or 7 years ago. But what they do have is they have a set of skills that is very good and translates to a D&D show. So they have the improv and they have the storytelling, and more than anything is that they have trust in the people across the table that are going to let them tell the story when it's time. So what I see partially in my home games and a lot at conventions is that I sit at a table with random people at a convention, and I don't trust that I'm going to get my moment in the spotlight. I don't want to step on somebody else's thing, but I also don't want to pay for a con and tickets to a game and everything else to sit there and just roll dice.
Yeah.
I want to play Grot the goblin who can't find his spoon or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? I want to have that fun. But I don't trust Jim across the table to give me, when I start to talk, that ability. And everybody on Critical Role seems like, at least now, has that trust at the other people at that table to say, okay, this is where you're going to shine tonight. This fits your character so much more. I'm willing to say nothing for 4 hours because you are willing to do that. And it sounds like Zach's having that in his game, and that's awesome. And that's what I see more and more as I play with a group a long period of time. People aren't trying to win the fight or win this or win that, and or be the vocal party. And I think we can all do a level of CR in our home game if we sort of think about what is special about it. The thing that we don't have is we don't have unlimited money to put into props and sounds and audio, and we also don't have unlimited hours to DM, right?
Yeah.
So I think Matt's a pretty good DM, but he's not the best DM, but Matt has 60 hours a week to work on his storyline. So he can have 700 fleshed out characters.
Well, and it's like anything, right? I think there are, for me at least, my analysis of it last night was the first thing that I noticed was that the unpublished contract between them. It's it's not something that they've ever said in the public before, but it is there is like Zach mentioned, there's a handoff between each of them. I'm done, and they give themselves only so much time to chew up a scene before they hand it off to another person, and that person is not always another player. Or an NPC. It may just be Matt, and we're done. And then, but I also watched Matt's the way that he kind of operates. There's a rhythm to the way that they run the game too, to where Matt he is cognizant of when they are kind of on a roll, and then he, like, no pun intended, and then he'll pause first. He'll say something, and then he'll pause, waiting for them to respond to it. Nothing. And I'm going to move on to the next thing, and then the next thing, and next thing. So there's like this organic. I say organic. It's more. I think it's more processed than it actually is organic. And by processed, I mean it's like there is a method that they're following to intentionally produce something that is entertaining, as opposed for everyone else, as opposed to only entertaining for them. Go ahead, Zach.
Well, that being said, I think as much as I feel like they've worked things out behind the scene, I think that there's also elements that, at least in that first episode, in my opinion, limited opinion, right? Mm-hmm. Limited context, were rough. Especially that first hour. Mm-hmm. And I attribute that to a learning experience for me. Whether this is a learning experience for them, that's up to them. But for me, it was a learning experience of that first hour and a half where there was really no dice being rolled and also no story being told. Mm-hmm. It was really just, we're going to have your characters kind of poke at the scene that is presented and then move to another place in the city and poke at that scene. That to me was a big learning thing, because I've been playing around with the ideas of, like, what does a session 0 look like, or what does that first session look like? Can you divide up that first session into multiple first sessions with smaller pieces of the group? And could you do little one-on-one sessions at the beginning, like different ways to establish character? I think the thing that broadcast very loud to me was, like, it's important that in the middle of setting up the campaign and setting up the story and setting up the characters, you don't lose sight of you're actually sitting down to play an adventure.
Right.
And there's need to be some movement and some flow to that, and that really stuck out.
Well, and it's also one of the things that stuck with me too is, like, that we mentioned it at the very beginning when Matt was kind of doing his monologue about, like, kind of like pulling everybody into the campaign, not just the campaign but the campaign setting also, right? Like, there was just a wall of crap that I didn't understand. That
there was a bunch of box text.
Yeah, well, not the box text is one thing, right? But there are all these names and places that I've got no context on as a first-time viewer. So coming in like campaign 3, episode 1, like, none of that meant anything to me. But it may have been, like, super Easter eggy for everybody else, and I know exactly where that thing is. Or if they did, like, Exandria, the extended stuff, like, that may mean something to them. But for me, coming in cold, I had no clue. So a lot of it was me still trying to, like, I'm just, it's like the barest thread hanging on to where they are and what they're doing, and I'm more focused on just the immediate of what's going on, and not necessarily the setting that Matt tried to immerse them in.
I don't I don't really think that first opening salvo from Matt was Easter eggy or a bunch of callbacks. So I don't think you missed anything. I think what that was is more like the opening crawl of Star Wars.
Okay.
It's I'm gonna drop names, and I'm gonna drop places, and I'm gonna drop events that I've never talked about before, but they're gonna come up again later in. I'm just kind of setting the scene, kind of a thing. And Zach said something just a little bit ago that I think is key, and he said something about watching this first episode. They weren't playing an adventure, they were chewing through scenery. And I think that's part of what Critical Role, where there's a huge disconnect for some people with Critical Role, because like the four of us, we come from an Adventurers League background currently. I mean, we've played D&D in other capacities before that, but we run a lot of Adventurers League at conventions, and that is an adventure in 4 hours. You have to get from point A to point B in that 4 hours. Go.
So when
On Critical Role,
sorry,
yeah.
I didn't mean to.
No, on Critical Role, they're not running an adventure. They're playing a story, and that's a completely different style than what a lot of people are used to. So that's why you can have those, just two characters chewing up scenery for an hour, and everybody else just sits and watches because they're trained as actors. They know how to do those handoffs, and they're excited to see what those people that have the floor are going to do with their time. And we don't have that in normal games, because people, like Thomas said, they want their time in the spotlight in that 4 hours. They've paid for their ticket. They want to do something cool. They want to be the DM's focus for a few minutes like everybody else. These, the Critical Role group, they don't have that preconceived notion. If Sam doesn't say one word for the entire 4 hours because Marisha and Laura, it's all about them, he's happy to sit there. He might do a little bit of side conversations here and there, but he's paying attention to what's going on between Marisha and Laura for that time, because he's their friend outside of the game, and he's their fan inside the game.
And with that, like, I have only ever done 5 episodes or so of streamed D&D. Zach and I did Dungeon, which is like a dungeon crawl of layers of dungeon that he wrote at the beginning of last year on Twitch. And even when I am not locked into those people in the room, and they have it even more, right? Because they have friendships with all these people. These are mostly their best friends at this point. But also these are their business partners. They want to see them succeed, all of the above. But even when I didn't have those same background with the people that I was playing with, I paid more attention because I knew that I was putting on a show to however many people were there, whether it was no people or we never had a ton of people, but a couple people, they're watching me, so I don't want to be jamming my face full of chips or talking to my wife off camera or whatever it may be. My goal is to give more so, and that's probably not fair, right? Because I should be giving that same attention in my home game and everything else. We should play, like Adventures League, we should play 2 hours and then a scheduled break and whatever, unless something's happening. But that's not how it happens. When we get together, I have my phone out because my kids sometimes call because I play on Saturday mornings, or I'm waiting for a call from convention or whatever it may be. I am setting things up because I want to be there and I want to be around my friends, but I'm not giving the same 100% to the story. and they have even more reason than I do to give 100% because it's their business and their livelihood and friends and all of the above.
Well, that's one of the things that we talked about a little bit, I think, off show, that I had brought up specifically, is that I know that we're talking about like almost a business arrangement between entertainers, right? But I think that there's a lot to be gleaned as a player from that, not necessarily just the dungeon master. And I know we focus really heavily on DMing on the show, but I'd like right now for myself, I'd like to park on how to be a really effective player, not just effective player, but like there's a difference between a good player, the player that shows up on time, they are prepared, they have their dice, they've got their character sheet, they know what spells they've got, they understand that's a good player that I want to have at my table. The difference to me between a good player and a stellar player is the player that is engaged, that is invested in not necessarily in my camp, my world, or anything like that, but they're invested in the table. This is like helping create or collaborating on a story and or a scene or whatever you want to call it. It's like they're invested in it. They are engaged. They have they bring an energy to the table, their own unique energy that is theirs. They're not trying to mimic somebody else's. It's theirs, right? And they're speaking their own voice through their character. But that player is, whenever a player does that, they are equal to the DM in every possible capacity, if not like stratospherically more so. The DM can then just kind of like sit back and like act as a mediator and a moderator, and then just kind of like give off the effects of what their actions do. But really, the players really own the story at that point. And for me, I would just go on cruise control as the DM and let them just chew it up as much as they want. And I'd be very happy to have players like that at the table that are just not just invested in their character, not just in theirs, but they're invested in other people's characters, and they're attentive and they're intensely listening and paying attention, and like they're not on their phone or things like that. Like the more of that you get, those tables that I've sat at where that's happened, that's where you have these really amazing moments with one another that are the things that you talk about for years after.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, when you say, a good player is this and an exceptional player is this, the funny thing is the Critical Role cast really aren't in the category of good players. Because a lot of them don't know what their spells do.
That's the one thing that was shocking me. A lot of them don't
know what their abilities do and things like that, and won't for the entirety of the campaign. But I think Mitch brought up in the chat about the expectation of players, that watch Critical Role and then come to D&D for the first time and expect, Critical Role levels of game. It's like, you know what? Here's the thing. And this is to all players out there, whether you're brand new, whether you've been playing for 40 years. If you want Critical Role levels of DMing, then you be a Critical Role level of player.
Amen.
And you do all the things that John just said. You be engaged. You focus on what's going on. You know what is happening. You might not know the rules behind your rage, or you might not know how to shoot off a fireball, but you know your character, you know the drives. And the one thing that I've kind of settled into over the past year or so is everybody sitting at your table or in your virtual tabletop or however you're playing the game, everybody sitting at that table, DM included, is a player. And everybody has one responsibility at that table. And that responsibility is to make sure everyone else at that table has fun and has the ability to have a great time and to build a great story. Not you worried about your character, and that's the problem. The people that sit at your table and be like, well, you're not as good as Matt Mercer. It's like, well, yeah, you're not as good as anybody on Critical Role either. Because all you're worried about is your character. And what your character gets to do. As soon as the entire table gives up, and I think Critical Role does this better than anybody else that I've ever watched. The people on Critical Role are more interested in the cool shit that everybody else is going to do and not their own character. And that's what you need to have that kind of level of trust and storytelling, and how you can let people chew the scene for an hour or two and you not say a word. You have to have that desire to see what everybody else is going to do. Don't worry about what you're going to do. You know, don't worry about, oh, I want my time in the spotlight. You'll get yours because everybody wants that for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Why?
Go ahead, Thomas.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say that's why my wife watches it. My wife doesn't watch it because she cares about spells or abilities or anything else. We have $10,000 worth of role-playing stuff in this house, and she could be in any game she wanted to. We'd get sitters. I've already offered. She doesn't care about any of
Every night.
Yeah. I just write notes before I go into work. I'm like, well, that sitter is available this weekend. If you want, I'll run it. But
just a calendar filled with like 6 different sitters, and it's like,
yeah, this is their availability. This is where they overlap. We could have 2 sitters, one for each kid. And so she doesn't care about any of that. But what she does love is she does love the storytelling and the family feel of the show.
Yeah.
And the funny, when it needs to be funny, it's funny. When it needs to be dramatic, it's dramatic. And so she does the same thing. She puts it on. She works in an office and phones, and she doesn't watch. She doesn't re-listen or go. She has never gone back and started, but she started at season 2 and listened through season 2, and we watch normally like the first 45 minutes together on Thursdays, and then we both listen to it in podcast form on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And she really enjoys it, and she gives a damn about D&D, right?
Yeah.
So. It's funny to see that, like, it very much is a show, but it's a show because they have all those good D&D tendencies, right? The reason it's so good is the same thing he said, is that we need to be better players if we want those kind of situations in our home games. We need to be better at, as a DM, letting our players take that spotlight, or as a player helping set the scene for the DM, so we are telling stories that are for everyone, not just you or not just me or whatever it may be.
I'll say, like, the last thing that I kind of pulled from it, to kind of, bolt something onto the side of what you just said, is, you said your wife doesn't really give a damn about D&D, and I'm like, that was one of the comments that I brought up during the stream, which was, I think when I was sitting there and actually, like, thinking about the show objectively, I realized that there's a lot of D&D that's actually packed into that show. John, you brought up ACK Inc. before.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of D&D that is discarded sometimes with ACK Inc., right?
Yeah.
Like, and I love that show. I adore it, actually. But they've consistently needed a dungeon master who can bend to their shenanigans, their ignorance of the rules, their disregard for the rules, certainly, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that I noticed with Critical Role was, like, this is a show that doesn't even have to probably play D&D anymore. I bet if they went and played Pathfinder, their audience would not leave them, right?
Oh yeah, I agree.
By and large. So,
well, they've done 2 big one-shots, or Deadwood was probably one of the better 8 episodes in a row, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And that wasn't D&D. And then they just did the one, Ashley just ran a sci-fi horror kind of feel, aliens kind of one-shot. And that got 40,000 people watching live as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's the package is sold as D&D, but you're absolutely right. I think they could run a show either parallel or take some break from D&D and do what Call of Cthulhu or whatever. They've done Call of Cthulhu and things like that. And I think they would see those same kind of numbers because of the storytelling.
But that's where I'm getting at, is that, like, they're still playing those games, and I really appreciate that. I think there's more there than what the average viewer or the passerby would see initially. Like it still warms my cockles that in season 3, right? In season 3, first episode, he's plopping out a gridded map
Mm-hmm.
with minis, and
Mm-hmm.
they're measuring things and counting out movement. Like they arguably should not be doing that. They don't have to. They arguably should not for a streamed show slash podcast to be counting out movement is tedious, right? Um, but they do, and I'm like that's ah,
Well,
they
look,
haven't
we've
they
talked
haven't left
about
that
it.
behind.
We've talked about it before about how, and this is conjecture, admittedly, but how like the state of the game and the direction that the game seems to be veering towards is more of like a almost more theater of the mind and more of a internally cinematic experience as opposed to more tactical. And so, in the like to your point, in the first session, they're still going to the tactical. They've still got minis and positioning and grids, and they're like you said, they're counting things out. So, it is interesting to me to see, and I'm grateful for that. By the way, there are some things. It's part of the the genesis of D&D, of that tactical play that's still honored, utilized at the table there, as opposed to just being just one really long improv session with one another.
It made me realize maybe that like I kind of had this like idea in my head, and it wasn't based on any fact necessarily, but I had in my head that like all the newer wave of players, they really cared that much about tactics and grids and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to tell a story. I'm like, I'm not sure that's true. I think maybe they want the whole package. They just, want it in a different ratio than we've come to expect, but they're not abandoning that. And I think that if I actually, when I thought about it, I'm like, I think that holds true at convention play at least when I run for the younger audience or the audience that's with coming in with fresher eyes. They love the throw out the minis
Yep.
and the terrain and all that just as much as the older crowd does, the more experienced crowd does. I don't think that we're losing that. I think in today's age where you can find a group online easier than you can find a group in person, it's harder to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a challenge, but I don't think that the desire has seeped
Well, I've
away.
seen a similar thing that you've seen with new players, both in person and online. There's like they're relieved. The ones that I've run for, they're relieved whenever a grid comes out, when a map comes out, and there's something for them to actually look at, like that's kinetic. There's a touch and a texture to it. There's so that there's more grounded in the real. It kind of creates that bridge of the theater of the mind with what they actually can see with their own eyes. And so between being relieved, and that's whenever they kind of like they all sit up, and their body, they shift, and you can see them lean forward, and they become more interested in what's going on whenever those physical things come into play, and not just like handouts, right? Because you see a difference between, well, here's a scroll that I spent 2 hours aging and printing off and doing all this other stuff. This handout that I'm handing over, oh, that's pretty cool. And then they kind of like, oh, wow, you did a really great job on that, and they're done. As opposed to, here's a map that I put together, and here are minis. And they're like, everyone leans forward and leans a little bit closer, and they get a little bit more into the story whenever they can actually kind of see things unfold in front of their eyes.
Well, yeah, because what is that scroll really doing? It might be immersion. It might help pull you into the story some more, but there's nothing else to do with it.
Sure.
They showed that in the
cool.
very first episode. They gave Laura the noted that she wasn't able to study at the library. Was on a like a physical prop that she opened up and read. The other part of that is, I think you see that on both sides, right? My group tried playing Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and got done after 3 levels. We loved the group, we loved our characters. They just had no interest in. They went out of Skullport and never came back. They had no interest in turn a corner, fight, turn a corner, say 2 words and fight, turn a corner, fight, turn a corner, search, turn a corner, fight.
I think there's a difference between, like, that's a slog, though. I mean, you're
No,
not going to
and
get any
that's
argument
what I'm
out of me.
saying is that I'm not. They're not interested in. Hey, why aren't we having any fights? Right? None of my players want to come to the table every Sunday and talk with NPCs week after week after week. If that means there's no fighting in one 7 o'clock or 1 7-hour game or something like that, or 6, whatever we play, it's not the end of the world. But if I don't give combat in the next game, people are going to be like, hey, what's going on here? So I think we see people who are used to playing, just like we see in any part of your day or any part of your hobby or any part of your life. You see people who are used to an older way, which is, hey, I would like to see it. When D&D started, it was basically a combat scenario kind of feel, that Dungeon and Mad Mage go in and see if we can survive kind of feel. And they're so afraid of hearing that that we're going to role play and we're focusing on role play players and things like that. And the opposite is true about the younger people coming in too. And I've had people in my store, because I use Critical Role maybe a little differently than some, but I use Critical Role as almost a old-fashioned radio story, right? Mm-hmm. So that's sort of what I treat Critical Role as. And I find that I enjoy combat, but I find that in Critical Role, I am a lot less invested during a combat.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I don't care as much when they're fighting. I want to hear about the new monsters. I want to hear about what's going on. And I do enjoy listening to them play, but I will leave my phone running at my desk and go use the bathroom or anything else. I don't have to pause and worry about missing 30 seconds or go grab a water or whatever it is. If I'm listening to story, I normally don't do that. I normally don't walk away from the storyline because things are changing.
Right.
I know enough about how barbarians work or how sorcerers work, whatever it may be, that I don't have to hear them cast Chaos Bolt or whatever it may be. I do want to know when they're going across the cable car and he's explaining the land situation and everything else, what that looks like. Because I think that I have said to people in my store, and to get back to the point of like, hey, I actually fall on the other side, is that I get upset when there's too much combat. Mm-hmm. The end of campaigns when there was 5 and 7 hour fights, at some point you're just like, okay, I don't really care about this fight anymore. Mm-hmm. I want to get the 30 minutes 30 minutes of drama in the front and 30 minutes of drama in the back, and I want 45 minutes of combat. Mm-hmm. And people look at me, these young guys, they're like, well, then how can I do my cool things? So I think that both sides sort of look at this as a mix that I don't think D&D's ever going to go away from a combat-based game, but I also don't think that anybody is interested anymore, or most people are not interested anymore in hey, I'm going to sit down and we're going to fight through this dungeon for hours.
Well, how many times have you all, as AL DMs, right? How many times have you been at a table and one of the compliments that you've gotten was, you know what I really liked about that adventure? It was really well balanced. I like the fact that there was some role play and there was some tactical stuff. We got to fight some stuff and we got to talk to some people. They want the balance. Like, people, to your point, like, if you do one full RP session for your home group, even your home group the next time around is like, are we going to fight anything? Are we like, do you not have like a board or something for us to Jenga at some point here? Because that's a thing that needs to happen. And you get that in public play. I get that all the time. Do you all get the same thing from your players?
In
100%.
public play, yeah. I mean, you want that balance in home play. It's not necessarily they're upset if we have a session of all role play and the next one, oh, we're upset because we're going to have another session of all role play. It's like, the story goes where the story goes. If you guys want to attack the king because you're talking to him because you didn't get to fight anything last night or last time, you go right ahead and we'll stomp you. But that's fine. I think one of the things that I get frustrated with is the idea that the only cool things your character can do is on your character sheet. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It's like it's only the ability. That was the problem with me for fourth edition
Yeah.
because I was stuck so much on what those powers said.
Yep.
Because they put so much into the powers and like flavor text and all this stuff. So it's like, well, I want to use this ability, but the situation doesn't resemble the little piece of flavor text at the bottom, so
Well,
I can't
and not
really
only
do
that,
it.
but it was incredibly explicit in fourth edition about this is exactly what it does. Period.
Mm-hmm.
There's no room for flex in that. And to your point,
Yeah.
you're not alone. Like I kind of begin to tell you how many. One of the things that I've seen is I wouldn't say a cardinal sin, but I think it's something that players that have been playing D&D for a while fall into, is that they depend so much on their character sheet to tell them what they can do, as
Yep.
opposed to them kind of like new players will say, "Hey, can I do this?" Yes, you can
Yes.
do that, absolutely. Whereas a player, a more vetted player, will look at the character sheet and that's like, well, that's not. That's it. I
That
can't,
being
I can't
said-
do the thing, right?
I'm not good at that, so I'm not going to make that charisma check. Or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. That being said, I think that there's a variety of players too. It's not just experience level.
Sure.
It's also just like what a player wants out of the game. I'll be the first to say that like when I play D&D, as opposed to other RPGs,
Mhm.
I want combat.
Hmm.
I am happy to do a role play session. I like the RP aspects. I like storytelling. I like all of that. But especially when I play, as a player, I want combat to be a part of it. And a big part of that is because I do have a character sheet, and because I selected to play this system because I like the way that the mechanics work. And the mechanics are, for a player, the things on the character sheet. So there, and I think the thing in my home games especially, like you come to learn that there are certain players that could play role play sessions every session for and never roll a dice again probably, and they'd be super happy. And then there are players who need to combat every single session, and
I think those are rare, though. I think those two are the end of the spectrum, and they're rare.
they can be, but then there's always a mixture of skewing one way and skewing the other in most games, right? It's rare that you have a whole crew that skews towards combat, or a whole crew that skews towards loving the role play. Does happen, but that's a rarity. So, is there anything else that we need to cover, fellas? I know we're pushing up on a late episode, a long episode tonight. Anything else that you drew out?
I'll just say there was a couple of things talked about in chat that I took little notes here. Is that before we do our rating system, because there's something I want to talk about in the how we felt after this episode. But when we said it feels more like a business, and I don't feel that way as much, right? Because yes, they are pushing their business stuff in the beginning, and it's a lot more prevalent because there's a lot their business has grown, so there's a lot more things to push. But I think that what did it for me to show that it's more about them playing a game is the fact that it seems like every season characters get crazier, not just with Sam, but with everybody, mostly just to mess with their friends. And if it was a business, you're going to take more easy approach, in my opinion. And so I felt like in the beginning of this session that it wasn't, some of these things weren't serious enough. And part of that was reusing some of these characters that have been on Exandria United and Travis's character who was for a one shot.
Yeah.
I was let down when half the cast were people that I already saw after waiting for 3 months for new characters.
To me, it's not. It's more businessy. It's campaign 1. The whole way through felt like here is a group of people playing D&D that are very skilled in what they do, and they and their occupations, have a chance to shine in this spotlight here. and so we're getting to see a new and different thing. But it's a group of friends playing this game, and we get to watch. And it's a very awesome story. It's very intricate. It's very involved, and it's really cool. Campaign 2 for me, it wasn't so much businessy. It was they realized they had a show, and I I would get frustrated during certain episodes because it's like, okay, for whatever reason, the cast has more of a desire to let's put on a fun episode for the people that's watching, and not let's play this game as friends and play out this cool story. And I'm hoping in campaign 3 they go back to the season 1 style of, hey, forget that you've got a million people watching you right now. Just play the game and tell the story that you guys are doing, because I don't like it so much when it's, oh, let's try to be funny right now for the fans watching. Hey, let's try to do this for the people watching. That's where, to me, that's where you're losing, where it loses some of the, the spark.
Well, it's
Well,
what,
my
like,
guess
it's
is
from the
they
old adage: you can't
understand.
capture lightning in a bottle. You know, but it sounds like to me, as someone who has not seen any of that, for me, I immediately see the production of it and the synthesis of a game as opposed to the organic growth, just like the outflow of a game just happening with people that are really friend that know one another and they're comfortable with one another, close to one another. They know, they're kind of like their play styles and stuff like that. So I could see it being synthesized outside of just like the production values, right? Because they got a really sweet rig and setup and lights and all that good stuff. That's one thing. But even still, just the way that it kind of played out felt. That's why I used the term of reality television. If it is synthesized reality, it's not. I'm not going to go so far as to say that it was scripted, but I do think that there are probably like some beats and elements that are probably like, hey, there's something that's going to come up that's going to be like this. They may not say, Matt may not say exactly what it is, or maybe it is more organic than that. I'm not entirely sure, but it does. If there, it felt like it kind of there were like predetermined a path, if not rails, that the thing was going to end up flowing on. It just felt like that the way that it operated, and I don't begrudge that. As someone that's coming in fresh, I didn't experience that like that homebrew feel of season of a campaign 1 or the shift into. To me, that's just like that's what I this is what I know, and to me, it's like it is what it is. It's supposed to be entertainment, and so this is this is their attempt to appeal to a broader audience in entertainment, I guess.
Yeah.
I will say this though, they're willing to take risks though. I mean, like to me, a risk is if you drop f-bombs and like a lot of them in a stream, that to me diminishes your possible audience impact. Like who is going to listen or view, and who's going to be comfortable allowing their kids to view it or things like that too. So that was surprising to me. Some of the language that was used there, which I'm not
they've
being a prude
always
about it. I'm
been-
just really
Yeah,
surprised.
they've always been.
They've done that since the very beginning. So it is. It felt like there was more of that this week,
Because of
or
Taliesin.
this season. But even without Taliesin, it just felt like the overall feel was from it's not R, but it from teen to 18, 17, 8, whatever. It took that next half a step up or whatever, in my opinion. But it's always been ever since even season 1 when they first were on the thing. It was still making dick jokes and f-bombs and all of that, and they've never sort of built themselves out as a kids program. But I noticed the same thing, John, when I listened this week, as sort of I'm like, well, we are sort of just pushing that line a little bit, and it wasn't a push just for dramatic reason. It was just a push.
Like,
And like I don't mind, and I'm not a prude. I swear more than most people, and it still felt like I noticed it. So
Oh yeah, I noticed it very much, and that's why I say it because of Taliesin. Because last campaign, both of his characters, it would have been very out of character for him to drop f-bombs left and right. And now the character he currently is playing, this Ashton, I almost feel like he's of a mind that, oh no, this guy is really rough and rugged and swears a lot. And it doesn't, to me, the swearing did not feel natural. It's one thing when you're dropping F-bombs and it just kind of like flows. It's another when it feels like, oh, I should put an F-bomb here.
It was like Sam's joke of the names of the robots. And that felt like it flowed, right? Like, that's not something I'm going to say around my children, but it felt like it flowed in the moment. So
and it was a very quick and throwaway kind of.
Yeah, but it wasn't jarring, right? Like, I was listening while I was doing some work the other night, and I heard the laugh track and had to go back because I didn't catch it at first. Not the laughter, but I heard people.
heard the laughter. Yeah.
But just everybody there laughing in the studio, and had to rewind. I'm like, well, if everybody's dying laughing, I obviously missed a joke, and I had to go back. So it felt very normal as I'm listening, and that's part of it, right? Like, if I thought that this was focused on business, they would be. In my opinion, it's just it would be cleaning it up. They've already said that their animated series is going to be rated R. They are trying to say that, like, hey, we want you to be here, but this isn't something like we don't show any Critical Role in our store, but it would be, if there wasn't the swearing, it would be the perfect product.
Yeah,
because it does do a very good job of showing off and selling D&D stuff.
Yeah. All right. Anything else from you fine folks, fine gentlemen?
Well, did we ever finish off Thomas's thing and say
I think
where we are after the episode?
I think that's what we should do in closing. So,
okay.
Did this episode move the needle on your Critical Role fandom, or is the needle moved just in general for you since the last time that you picked it up, if it's been a while or whatnot? I'll start since we'll just work our way in reverse from the time we did before. I think I'm on the downhill trajectory. It's not Critical Role's fault. I think for me, Campaign 2 was long-winded. And it came at a perfect time. The long-windedness came at a perfect time for me to bail, for too little time in a week to make time for that. So nothing from this particular episode of Campaign 3 got my interest enough for me to recommit. Not to say it won't ever happen though. I'd say I'm probably still at that 4.5 area, but that's probably trending down.
I guess so. That's for me then. So then, for me, I'm still a 2 or 3. I'm pretty indifferent about it. Still, I'm not like upset, but I'm just like, I still haven't figured out what it is that everybody else loves about the show so much. Why there are critters. People are just rabid fan base for the show, and it's not. It's not a slight. I just don't understand it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish out the rest of the episode. That's my first commitment. As I committed to watching one full episode, I'm going to do that because I promised I would. But I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to watch the second episode because I really do want to understand why. I may not love it, but I do. I want to have a better finger on the pulse of that community and understand what they love about it so much. And I may not get it, so just so that everyone knows I did give it the old college try to like it.
Well, but here's a to address that.
Mm-hmm.
Why is there a fan base around Dragonlance?
Because it's the greatest. Look, man, don't do this to me. Don't do this to me because it's the greatest thing that's ever been written. I'm just kidding.
Why is there a fan base around the Twilight series?
Sure,
you know.
But again, sure. At the same time,
one to one.
But you're talking about
there's a lot of crossover there.
There's a lot of crossover.
Right. But remember, in Critical Role, it is heavily. I believe it heavily influences the hobby, and it heavily influences who we're bringing in. It influences what their expectation is when they come in, and I want to play with new players. I don't want to just play with people that have played for millions of years, like us old grognards. I want to play with those new players, but I want to understand what their expectations are and why they love this medium so much. Right? I don't have to love it, but if I got a little bit closer to understanding it, I'd be satisfied with that. So I'm willing to go the extra mile. I'm going to go another 4 hours on top of the 4-hour commitment that I promised to. So
Right on.
And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow suit with Thomas and Troy. And I'm going to listen rather than try to watch.
There you
We'll
go.
see if that makes a difference or not.
One of the things I do is I like to listen, but if something cool happens and you can tell when he brings out a set piece or something like that, and they all go nuts over it, then I'll be like, okay, I'll go back when I get home and I will pull up the video and I will find that spot so I can see what they're looking at. Because everything else you don't need to see, because it's just them sitting around the table talking, and you don't need to watch them.
Right.
Or if they laugh at something, if there's something that I catch, I will go back and try to watch those sections. But, and I also kind of think, I applaud you for like, wanting to figure out what it is that people want. But the thing with Critical Role is it's so many different things to so many different people.
Sure.
Honestly, it's D&D that I have access to all the time. I can just listen and have D&D going on when I'm driving. And that's why I listen to other podcasts and stuff like that too. It's just another way that I can get a dose of D&D in my life during times that I usually can't. I'm still a fan. I'm going to still hover right there between 6 and 7 for right now until the campaign progresses. I'll be listening and watching this one too. I actually came to Critical Role late. I didn't start it until the very end of season 1. And I was John. I was John before. It's like, why do I want to watch people play D&D? That's stupid. I don't want anything to do that. Well, a lot of people do it. It's just dumb. And then the Acquisitions Inc., I would watch a few of those with some friends. I went to the theater and saw the one they did in the theater. And it was like, because that is just gonzo, bizarro, jokey D&D, and it's just a hoot. And then I was watching our patron saint Matt Colville discuss what happened in episode 118 or 114, whichever it was, when they were fighting the big bad and the counterspell. And I'm like, well, what is he talking? Why is he making a video about this? Why is Matt Colville making a video about this? And I watched it. In the emotions that went through everything, and Colville got choked up as he was talking about it, and I'm like, oh wow, there must be something to this. I watched that full episode, and I'm like, you know what? I need to see the story behind this. And that's when I started at episode 1 of season 1 and went through.
Crap.
So
And
I'm
that's
still a
probably
fan.
that's probably the only video of Colville's that I haven't watched. It's like, oh, this is a campaign. This is like a Critical Role specific one. I'm really not interested in that.
And-
That's cool.
And this
I'm gonna have
is-
to go back and
well,
watch that one now too.
yes.
I will
that's
send
what
you the
sells it.
link to that YouTube video where they with the 10-minute video with that fight in the counterspell, because it shows that there is these players are not here for, at least at that time, and again, I can't speak for what they're doing or why they're doing it now, but at that time it showed that there is a connection
There's
to
love.
D&D and the story, and that it's not people making money on a stream. It was people playing a game where they were connected
Yeah.
to the point where they couldn't handle it.
Well, and I
It
hope
was-
for them that
it
they
was
don't
awesome.
fall out of love with it. Because anything that you do that could become a job, I would fear that I wouldn't love it the same way anymore, because I would associate it with work or with putting bread on the table, and that puts strain and stress on it, and it has you have to perform, and it can't be this organic thing that you do. So if it's the case that they're kind of falling prey to the demands of it being a show, and people are watching and they have to produce something as opposed to being able to sit down and just play games. I would really hate that for them. I really would. I'd be pretty sad if that were the case. And I hope that, to your point, I hope that if campaign 1 was the true form, well, for whatever that means, right? That I hope that there is a return to form and that they can actually just enjoy themselves and just play the game with one another. That
watch the Colville video, because he breaks it down. Because if you just watch the fight scene, because I missed it.
Me too.
He breaks it down. He's like, okay, if you see right here, so and so does this, and here's what he said, and here's why. Because there's some like, at the table.
Talk. Yeah.
And you're not hearing it very well because Matt is doing his thing and other people are taking their turns, and it's a big bombastic combat. And it's like, watch his eyes. Watch what he does here. He puts his head in his hands. Why does he do that? Why is he looking at Matt? Why is he starting to cry? And it's like, what the hell is he talking about? And so watching that whole video of him explaining it, and then he shows the clip at the end, I was choked up, and I'd never seen Critical Role before. And I'm like, done. I'm in. I gotta watch this.
Well, I'm sold at this point. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna watch that video that I kind of like I swiped against, right? And we'll see if it has the same effect.
That is almost exactly the same reason I got into it, but from a different angle. You talked about the Forced Gray, or the Forced Gray that Matt Mercer did as a like D&D live kind of feel with Storm King's Thunder and then Tomb of Annihilation. When I was starting to run for my store, those were that I was coming into the store D&D at the same Adventure League at the same time as those were on YouTube. So I didn't know anything about Matt Mercer, but I found Matt Mercer through Forced Gray. And I watched the first one, and the first one had already been out for 6 months or whatever it was. And the Tomb of Annihilation one was coming up. And I'm like, hey, I know some of those people. I've played paintball with that Cole Sprouse. I know Maglinello from the movies and everything else. And the other guys that are sitting around that table are all relatively... Deborah Ann Wool is from Daredevil. Like, I get all those names, right? But I don't know who Matt is. And I'm like, oh, this is fun. He's pretty good at this. Like, I like playing, and Matt's pretty good at this. I wonder what else he's done. And I started searching, and it was the week of 113. So I look up Critical Role because, of course, I do research on Matt, and I find Critical Role, and 113 was just live on YouTube. And so I go and watch that video, which is the most recent thing that he's done, and then I'm like, so when do we get 114? Because they're stopping right before that big slog of a battle. Yeah. And I then wait till it comes on YouTube the next time, because I never used Twitch at that point or anything else. And I watched 114 and then 115. And 115, I've watched 10 hours of gameplay at this point, and 5 of those were combat. And 115, I cried more than once. Yep. It was one of probably 5 times that I've cried since then. Like, I'm not a big, like, emotional crier kind of person, and I am now crying over a YouTube video that I know not much about, right? Yes. And I'm like, this is what I have to go back. So in between season 1 and season 2, I listened to almost the 6 weeks or 8 weeks that they took off. I listened to almost the entire season 1. Because I was painting and working an overnight job where I listened to headphones constantly. Yeah. And that's when I knew that that it was more than just a game for them, that it was this connection. And I don't think, and John said you wouldn't want that to change for them, and I don't think it has. And I think that's part of the reason they continue to have the adult language and have the dick jokes and have the all the inside jokes and everything else, instead of picking instead of making easy options and safe options and Where I do think that it's become more of a show than D&D is combat. I think things are dumbed down to save IPs at times. Meaning that I think combat is easier, and I think Matt could do a better job of making combat truer to form if this was a game at a table and you're not going to kill off $1 million idea.
That is a bit, but he is not afraid of putting some smackdown sometimes. I mean,
Yeah. I think he has found a way to soften it enough that it looks like real combat, but it is mostly pretty safe.
yeah, I would say
And
so.
which is the opposite of Zach's games, where it looks like real D&D, but it's mostly just death.
That's fair. That is so.
So I had to get that in there after everyone was talking in the chat. But Troy, you never gave another number where you're at now.
Oh no, I did. I said I'm still probably like that 6 or 7. I need to see where this campaign's going to go. If I go up a little bit ways or down. I mean, I enjoyed season 2 or campaign 2. Some of the characters just really grated on me right from the beginning, and it went all the way through. But I will tell you this, for John, that if you go back, if you watch that Colville video and you just do decide to go back and try, to watch season 1, keep your eye on Sam, because it seems like 9 times out of 10, if there's something that's going to hit you in the feels, it's coming from Sam.
Okay.
Sam is the most professional. What's the word I'm looking for? The just going off the top of your cuff. What's the name of that for?
Improvisationalist.
Improv. Yeah, I mean he did improv theater for years before doing some voice actor stuff and things like that too. So
Okay.
he that's his entire career, not entire, but that's a huge part of his
That's
background.
huge.
So he is really good at tying people's stories from one side to the other.
Yeah, yeah.
But-
He comes off like, oh, this guy is just the absolute chaos jokester at the table, but he will do things that is just watch the Colville video and then watch Critical Role. What's my mother's name?
Okay.
Yeah, and it's funny that everybody is about the same level of like score. Like season 3 didn't change anything for anybody. John comes in still indifferent, and Zach is about where he left when we talked at the end.
Well,
of
that first episode was. I mean, I appreciate the staggered introduction to the characters. I think that's probably where like any scripting would have been done is like, okay, I'm bringing you 2 in first, then I'm going to bring you in, then I'm going to bring you in, that kind of thing.
I don't even think that felt that way, just because of the fact that people seemed to be like not ready to get back up and leave the table when they did. But
Yeah.
that being said, I start all my campaigns that way, so it didn't feel weird to me.
Yeah, it didn't feel weird. It just felt. It's one thing if you're sitting at the table going through it. It's another thing if you're sitting there watching it, or if you're the person sitting in the hallway, like what John said, for an hour and a half while the rest of the people get to do something. But that's for our style of games. These people are all about that kind of thing because the whole time Travis is standing off camera watching his friends shine, and that excites him.
They're telling a 500-hour story, not a 5-hour story.
Yep.
And so for me, my overall outlook of Critical Role hasn't changed yet. But I would go from like an 8.5 to like a 5 on this season.
To start out, yeah.
Did you watch the second episode yet?
No, I have watched the first episode pretty much twice now.
Okay.
And for me, the character, as I said, I was unbelievably disappointed that half the cast is a refill. And I understand. I haven't watched all of Exandria United, so maybe that will change my feeling on that. And I said I'm not overall changing my score on Critical Role as a whole, but it just feels like the players now are picking characters to sort of say, how can I make my friends laugh and joke and everything else. And where people, in the very beginning, I told Kill-A-Lot that I would tell him why I don't think it's more of a business choice than anything else, but I would like it to be more business because I want sort of that, the radio theater feel. And what season 1 or what episode 1 felt like, well, a lot of the time was, I'm Sam, I'm going to make this character that's going to make everybody laugh, and the reason my name is the way it is because I'm waiting for this punchline to come, and everything else, right? It's more of a goofy thing, not a drama that I'm wanting to listen to.
Yeah.
And the same with Travis coming back as this 85-year-old human and things like that, right? I will put it out there that I think Travis's character is just a NPC that he's playing. He's level 5, everyone else is level 3. My guess is that he is a throwaway character until they get to whatever backstory stop that he is the character that he wants to play.
Yeah, I agree.
But like Robbie is an addition that is not going to stick around. It's only going to be the 7 of them again at some point. But it's just,
I heard he was there for the whole season.
I've heard nothing but the opposite.
Okay, that's good because
But
that is the one thing about this show that's rough is like there are a lot of people already.
Yeah, so that was my thing is I don't dislike Robbie as a player or an individual, but I already dislike combat is already the reason why I don't listen as intently. Now you go from 6 players at times to 7 players to 8 players, and now you're like, okay, now every combat is 2.5 hours. That being said, I am going to be excited to listen to episodes 2 and 3 like I always am. But I am more frustrated that it wasn't more of a business decision, right? Like the swearing caught me off guard, and I'm watched 1,000 hours of content already. The characters that were the same or anything else caught me off guard. The certain characters and the way they approach them as sort of a laughable, make fun of my buddies, I'm doing this because we're here kind of thing, not as a drama. And again, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be doing it that way. I'm just saying it that for me as a consumer of the media,
right.
I want a drama, I want a story. And again, I'm sure they're going to get there. There's nothing that would stop me from watching the first 20 episodes probably, or listening to the first 20 episodes and committing 80 hours of my life to trying to see if this is something that I want to do. But yeah, I was disappointed, and it wasn't the skewed start, but I was disappointed in the first episode.
Yeah.
And I will be interested to see where that goes. I did love the setting that Matt portrayed.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's a whole different thing, and I know we don't have a ton of time for that, but it did go very, the character choices were strange. It seemed like it was very lopsided party, and it seemed like a lot of this was LOLs instead of trying to tell a story. It was more of a friends joking around at a one-shot than it was.
Yeah, let's make up weird characters.
Let's make up weird characters. And again, I don't know what half of these characters or subclasses or anything else truly are yet. So we'll see. I'm still super excited for it. I will, as I said, I'll watch a bunch of it, but I am interested to see where this goes, and I can't believe how good their stats are, because I don't think I've ever rolled stats anywhere close to what every single one of these players is playing.
I think they need to release Critical Role character creation dice.
Yeah,
100%.
Damn. Because I get like point buy if lucky stats.
Yeah, if lucky.
And they get like the average one in here is like 15s, 14s, and 13s, and I'm just like, I have no clue what is going on here. But my 4d6 drop the lowest is not these numbers.
Yeah.
Well, fellas, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Appreciate you guys hanging out. Appreciate all of chat. I'm not even going to try to attempt to call everyone out by name. We did that at the beginning and throughout where we could. But we had a great chat tonight. Appreciate you all hanging in there.
Yes, indeed.
We've got some cool guests on the horizon, some regular episodes on the horizon. A lot in store. If you have thoughts about this episode or any other, you can head over to our Facebook page and drop us a comment or a message. You can also head over to our Discord, which is alive and kicking, and chat with us there. We'd love to have a good discussion. You can find that information and more in the show notes if you're listening on a podcast. If you're listening live, you can always hit us up and we'll get you the links. Fellas, thanks again. And until next week, we'll see you next time.
Have a great game, everybody. And is it Tuesday yet?
Everybody